I Am the Swarm. Author, Quantum Wizard. Chapter 151, Anaerobic Survival Experiment. As time passed, the number of intelligent entities within the swarm network grew. Under Luo Wen's deliberate selection, most of them were scientists. Some were given new identities and returned to the Imperial Space Research Institute, continuing their previous projects. Others joined Starlight Enterprises, heading private laboratories under its banner. One day, in a Starlight Enterprises laboratory specializing in extraterrestrial environments, a new experiment began. The rat folk currently lacked any means to explore outer space and thus had no knowledge of its conditions. However, Luo Wen, being educated, knew the basics: low temperatures, lack of oxygen, microgravity, and pervasive cosmic radiation. These experiments, being difficult to justify officially, couldn't gain approval in the rat folk's official Space Research Institute. As a result, they were relegated to private labs funded and staffed by Luo Wen's recruits. Thanks to unlimited resources and funding, this lab had made notable progress. They developed devices capable of simulating vacuum environments and generating various forms of space radiation. Space radiation, a dangerous mix of gamma rays, high-energy protons, and cosmic rays, was exceedingly harmful to living organisms. The lab publicly claimed its research aimed to develop protective suits that could provide oxygen and shield wearers from radiation. This explanation served as a cover story, as Starlight Enterprises, which conducted mineral explorations, needed such suits to enable workers to delve deeper underground and endure radiation emitted by certain ores. For Luo Wen, exterminating the rat folk was a simple option, but leveraging their intelligence to develop technology was far more valuable. As such, he preferred deception when possible. On this particular day, the lab received a rare 30-centimeter-long arthropod. Allegedly caught by a fishing vessel, this marine creature could swim yet had wings. Though beetle-like in appearance, it also possessed pincers and 8 spider-like legs. Its exoskeleton, made of a unique material, could withstand immense deep-sea pressure. This previously unknown organism was acquired through the lab owner's extensive connections. With researchers specializing in biological materials, the lab routinely studied various organisms to observe their behavior under space radiation, hoping to find nature-derived solutions to counteract such conditions. When the researchers saw this beetle, they were awestruck. Its appearance defied conventional understanding. While dissection could yield significant discoveries, or at least a few research papers, the specimen was too valuable to destroy. Starlight Enterprises had gone to great lengths to procure it specifically for extreme environment testing. Luo Wen found the situation frustrating. He couldn't risk revealing his true form as a test subject for research. Yet, his progress through other avenues had been slow. Achieving space travel in the short term seemed unlikely, and the most viable solution appeared to be manufacturing spacecraft through the rat folk's ingenuity. But Luo Wen wasn't planning a leisurely trip to space. He needed to survive in the harsh conditions of outer space for extended periods. Space's extreme environment made rushing in unprepared a recipe for failure. Over the years, he had accumulated countless genetic fragments, but these were all derived from Earth-like conditions. Whether they would remain functional in space was uncertain. Therefore, he required a simulated space environment to test and evolve his genes under vacuum, radiation, and anaerobic conditions. This research base included a small number of insiders loyal to Luo Wen. It wasn't that he didn't want an entirely loyal team, but the swarm network's ability to recruit intelligent individuals had been discovered too recently. The network still lacked the numbers needed for a fully in-house lab. Luo Wen couldn't afford to wait decades for this ideal. Simulating and evolving new abilities in such an environment wasn't a quick process, and waiting for a fully loyal lab might take a century. He wasn't willing to accept such delays. Instead, he prioritized reducing the timeline. Although the lab's reliance on outsiders compromised security, Luo Wen wasn't irreplaceable provided the brood nest was safeguarded. Moreover, the researchers were tightly monitored to prevent leaks. Without their knowledge, parasitic organisms had also infiltrated their bodies. These parasites, derived from iron wireworms found in mantises, could release special chemicals into their host's nervous system when necessary. These chemicals disrupted protein synthesis, mimicked neural signals, and sent erroneous commands to the host's body. If someone attempted to divulge secrets, their vocal system would fail, rendering them mute. Persistent attempts could trigger uncontrollable self-destructive behavior. In this way, these researchers could be considered half-loyal to Luo Wen. The test chamber was soon prepared. Luo Wen wasted no time stepping into the enclosed space. The chamber, a sealed environment spanning a few square meters, had 99% of its air evacuated. Luo Wen's first challenge was to adapt to surviving without oxygen. The initial test results exceeded his expectations. After merely sleeping in the chamber, his body underwent subtle yet significant internal changes. The fiber-like structures in his body, originally developed after being disemboweled by the yellow earth ants to rapidly seal wounds, evolved further into a valve-like structure. These valves partitioned his body into isolated compartments. Normally functioning like sieves, they didn't impede bodily systems. In emergencies, they could seal all external openings, transforming his body into a completely sealed environment. Additionally, the energy stored in his tail lard organ could sustain his body for extended periods. This energy cycled within his body with minimal waste, producing only trace amounts of gas. These gases could be funneled into isolated chambers within his body for eventual release. Remarkably, these chambers could form anywhere in his body using the valve structures. By releasing gases, they could even provide propulsion for directional changes during flight. With modifications to key muscle groups, such as enhancing powerful sphincters, these gases could accelerate flight. While current speed limits remained low, the absence of atmospheric drag in space promised greater efficiency. Having solved the issues of bodily insulation and internal circulation, Luo Wen now needed to address energy acquisition. With this, he could survive in anaerobic environments for extended periods. However, outer space presented more than just a lack of oxygen. An oxygen deficiency was the easiest problem to solve. Chapter 152, Experiments Underway, 1. Despite starting strong, Luo Wen's subsequent experiments didn't go as smoothly. His next challenge was testing his survival in cold environments. Luo Wen's body already possessed genes for cold resistance, allowing him to endure ordinary frigid conditions with ease. However, the extreme cold of outer space was an entirely different matter. Luo Wen vaguely recalled space temperatures being around -200 degrees Celsius, but the exact figure escaped him. The rat folk's industrial limitations meant their laboratory could simulate temperatures only down to about -150 degrees Celsius. Even at this threshold, Luo Wen faced a significant setback. Shortly after entering the simulated environment, his body began losing heat rapidly. Frost formed on his surface, and his bodily fluids started to freeze. At this point, his emergency systems activated, putting him into hibernation mode. His metabolism slowed drastically, nearly halting fluid flow and paralyzing his body. Had Luo Wen not already been a networked being, his consciousness would likely have been forcibly shut down into a dormant state, leaving his body to slowly succumb to the cold's ravages. However, hibernation couldn't halt the damage caused by extreme cold. Within 5 minutes, his body began deteriorating at the cellular level. In the past, such circumstances would have meant death, his consciousness fading painlessly in slumber. Now, he was able to alert the insiders monitoring the experiment to halt the test and extract his body. Afterward, his body cocooned itself for 3 days to repair the damage. This remarkable recovery left the semi-insiders astonished. During this recovery period, Luo Wen reflected deeply. He realized his overconfidence, inflated by the success of the anaerobic experiment. Even with his exceptional talents, evolution required time. Plunging into an environment beyond his limits meant his body would collapse before his abilities could manifest. In simpler terms, he had overstepped his bounds. Taking this lesson to heart, the second experiment was conducted with the chamber temperature set between -50 and -60 degrees Celsius. After filling his tail lard organ with energy reserves, Luo Wen entered the chamber. The lowest temperature he had previously endured in nature was around -20 to -30 degrees. Dropping an additional 30 degrees was uncomfortable but bearable. His internal hibernation gene attempted to force him offline. As his limbs gradually numbed, Luo Wen didn't resist, allowing himself to enter hibernation. His body cocooned itself, while his consciousness returned to the swarm network. 2 days later, his body emerged from the cocoon. In the third experiment, Luo Wen's hibernation system no longer triggered warnings upon entering the chamber. This time, several genes fused during his hibernation, though their exact origins were unclear given the sheer number of samples he had accumulated over the years. The resulting fusion prompted his body to secrete an oily substance. This substance mixed with his bodily fluids, lowering their freezing point. As secretion continued, its concentration in his fluids increased, further reducing their freezing point. Previously, in similar conditions, his bodily fluids had begun to crystallize. But now, thanks to the oily substance, this did not occur. His fluids continued to flow normally, maintaining his bodily functions. In subsequent tests, the chamber's temperature was gradually lowered while the oily substance concentration increased. However, at -100 degrees Celsius, the substance's effectiveness waned, and crystallization began. As the temperature dropped further, Luo Wen's hibernation system reactivated, forcing him offline. His body entered hibernation but failed to cocoon itself. At this point, his genetic repository lacked anything capable of countering such extreme cold. Yet, as the temperature continued to plummet, his body avoided destruction. Instead, his innate talents initiated the evolution of his hibernation ability. His cells began shrinking, expelling non-essential materials outside their walls. The expelled material crystallized outside the cells, forming a protective layer. When the chamber reached the ratfolk's technological limit, Luo Wen's cells had expelled 90% of their contents, retaining only their core components. The external crystallization also provided some protection. At this point, Luo Wen's consciousness forcibly returned to his body. However, with his fluids completely frozen and circulation halted, he couldn't move. He signaled the laboratory to cease energy input, allowing the chamber temperature to gradually rise. As the crystals outside his cells melted, they were reabsorbed, and his cells began to regain activity. When the temperature reached -100 degrees Celsius, the oily substance resumed secretion, restoring fluid circulation and returning his body to normal. Afterward, Luo Wen confirmed that his body hadn't sustained any damage from this test. Yet, he found little cause for celebration. Beyond -100 degrees, he lost all mobility. He wasn't venturing into space to sleep. This outcome fell far short of his requirements. Moreover, the oily substance had reached its evolutionary limits, offering no further potential. Luo Wen needed to explore alternative methods to combat extreme cold. For now, there was no need to stubbornly pursue this avenue. While the ratfolk worked on upgrading the chamber's capabilities, Luo Wen would dispatch numerous bugs to the planet's poles in search of rare organisms capable of surviving and functioning in ultra-low temperatures. After a few days of rest, Luo Wen began his experiments with space radiation adaptation. While the experiments simulated space radiation, Luo Wen lacked precise knowledge of the specific types of radiation in space. The ratfolk hadn't yet sent spacecraft beyond the atmosphere, leaving them unable to measure such conditions. As a result, the radiation used in these tests primarily came from mineral samples or byproducts of other experiments. Although not identical to space radiation, they served as a starting point for finding countermeasures. In reality, any object in nature with a temperature above absolute zero emits radiation in the form of electromagnetic waves and particles. Luo Wen's concern was with harmful radiation levels exceeding safety thresholds, which could cause decay in his body, damage his nervous system, and harm other organ systems. In the first test, after 1 hour of exposure to harmful radiation, Luo Wen's body began cocooning. However, this cocoon offered little protection against radiation penetration. As time passed, the cocoon's internal temperature rose under continued radiation exposure. After 20 hours, irreversible cellular damage began to occur. Chapter 153, Experiments Underway, 2. In the past, Luo Wen would never have dared to conduct such risky experiments. However, his brood nest body had become more like a tool, a uniquely irreplaceable tool, but one that could serve as an ideal experimental subject. Over the years, as a swarm network entity, Luo Wen had mostly operated by projecting his consciousness into temporary hosts among the network's nodes. His original body often remained hidden deep under the ocean, rarely utilized. This shift in perspective had profoundly changed Luo Wen's mindset. He now saw himself as a mecha pilot, with the nodes including his original body acting as his mechas. Depending on the situation, he could switch between various mechas such as insects, birds, pterosaurs, dinosaurs, beasts, or even ratfolk, all tailored from genetic templates. If a mecha broke down, he could simply replace it. The brood nest, while special, was just another mecha. Of course, he still prioritized the protection of his brood nest and his original body, as they represented the swarm's ultimate potential and could not be destroyed simultaneously. But sacrificing one occasionally was acceptable. As it was now. Prolonged exposure to high-intensity radiation provided Luo Wen with valuable data, but it caused irreparable damage to his original body. Under the mournful gazes of the semi-insiders, the body was incinerated. A month later, an identical creature was delivered to the lab. The semi-insiders were baffled. Wasn't this specimen supposed to be extremely rare? Radiation protection experiments involved a wide variety of radiation sources, making them a lengthy endeavor. Luo Wen understood this and focused on ensuring progress wasn't hindered by human factors. Beyond that, he could only wait. Meanwhile, the Imperial Space Research Institute saw significant developments. With the strong support of the Kerrigan Empress, the institute expanded rapidly, influencing many young scholars' career choices. Within 5 years, its staff grew to over 20 times its initial size. It had originally been established by integrating experts from the Kingdom of Kerrigan and the Kingdom of Maracan, with nearly 20,000 personnel at its inception. The collaboration of so many brilliant minds accelerated progress on the lunar exploration project. The rat folk had been developing aerospace technology for years, but concepts alone weren't enough. Under Luo Wen's guidance, though he was no academic, their technological priorities were severely misaligned. Lacking a robust industrial foundation and a complete system, building a lunar rocket was a pipe dream. In previous years, the rat folk had launched numerous prototype rockets, all of which failed. To Luo Wen, some didn't even outperform firecrackers. Still, failure is the mother of success. Through repeated setbacks, the rat folk gained valuable experience and refined their designs to resemble rockets from Luo Wen's memories. However, they eventually hit a wall. Theoretical blueprints could no longer be realized. Supersonic flight demanded strong, pressure-resistant, heat-tolerant, and lightweight materials, which the rat folk's material sciences couldn't provide. Increasingly precise rocket engines exceeded the capabilities of rat folk machinery. The refinement of rocket fuels, oxidizers, and accelerants was beyond their technological reach. Many associated technologies faced similar challenges. Without external intervention, the project might have been abandoned due to its immense cost. But the Kerrigan Empress, being a networked being, proposed a groundbreaking solution, consolidating all related fields under the Research Institute's jurisdiction. This bold move shocked many. The Space Institute already consumed a significant portion of the Empire's budget with minimal results, mostly launching overpriced fireworks for public entertainment. Jealous of its funding, critics had repeatedly called for its dissolution, only to be overruled by the Empress. As the founding monarch, her authority was unparalleled, leaving dissenters little recourse. The Empress's latest expansion plans sparked a wave of rumors and slander. Some claimed she was infatuated with a handsome researcher, others questioned her sanity. There were even whispers of the Maracan kingdom's remnants attempting to exploit the situation to restore their monarchy. People quickly forgot how Kerrigan had unified the empire. Or perhaps the enormous stakes encouraged selective amnesia. Fortunately, Luo Wen was a helpful bug. Those spreading the wildest rumors, whether overtly or covertly, began dying in their sleep. Luo Wen's intervention rekindled memories of the fear once instilled by unfortunate accidents. The rumors swiftly disappeared, restoring peace and harmony to the empire. Ordinary citizens, bewildered by the rapid turn of events, could only marvel at how quickly the tide shifted. The Institute's expansion proposal passed with unprecedented speed, facing no further resistance. Many of the tens of thousands of personnel now in the Institute came from fields merged during this restructuring. As supporting systems improved, a prototype rocket based on conceptual blueprints was finally constructed 5 years later. Around the same time, Luo Wen resumed adaptation experiments in Starlight Enterprise's private lab. Once assembled and inspected, the new rocket underwent its first launch test 2 months later. Unfortunately, shortly after liftoff, it exploded into a spectacular firework, witnessed by officials and citizens across a 100-kilometer radius. While the test failed, it revealed numerous issues. 6 months later, a new rocket was built. The new rocket measured 15 meters tall and weighed 13.5 tons. Its nose cone housed gyroscopes, an inertial navigation computer, and a radio command receiver. The middle section contained fuel and oxidizer tanks, using a combination of alcohol fuel and liquid oxygen oxidizer. The tail housed the engine and fins. The system worked by pumping fuel and oxidizer through separate pipelines into the engine's combustion chamber, where they mixed, ignited, and burned. The high-temperature, high-pressure gases expelled from the bottom generated thrust. When Luo Wen examined the system and blueprints, he felt a strange sense of familiarity. Chapter 154, Experiments Underway, 3. Upon seeing the rocket's design blueprints, Luo Wen inexplicably thought of the Gatling system. Both designs involved 2 chambers working in tandem with a reaction chamber. However, Luo Wen couldn't yet find genetic organs capable of producing the necessary fuel and oxidizers, nor could biological structures achieve the strength required for a rocket combustion chamber. Otherwise, Luo Wen might have been able to create a biological rocket based on this theoretical framework and the blueprints. The rocket's direction was adjusted not only by movable air rudders on its 4 tail fins but also by 4 gas rudders installed within the nozzle, which directed the rocket's exhaust flames. After ignition, the rocket flew smoothly and ascended to an altitude of 500,000 meters before running out of fuel and falling back to the ground. This marked the first time that the Rat Folk's flying machine had reached such heights. Previous prototypes had struggled to even cross the 10,000 meter mark. The sudden leap in altitude represented a significant breakthrough and greatly excited the Rat Folk. Empress Kerrigan declared a 2-day national holiday to celebrate the achievement. The launch also provided a wealth of data. The Rat Folk devised multiple improvement plans based on the shortcomings identified during the launch. The dramatic advancement of the new rocket had a significant impact on the Kerrigan Empire. For the first time, the Rat Folk saw the possibility of success. Empress Kerrigan capitalized on this momentum by increasing funding to the Imperial Space Research Institute. The researchers at the institute were the most motivated by this success. With unlimited resources and full departmental cooperation, they managed to create an improved rocket within just 1 year. The main navigation and propulsion systems of the new rocket had shown no issues in the previous test. The failure was due to running out of fuel, so the new prototype focused on addressing this problem. The new rocket retained its streamlined design, narrow at the top and wider at the base, but was significantly larger, 34 meters tall with a diameter of 3 meters. Additionally, 4 booster rockets, each 19 meters long, were strapped to the lower half of the main body, making the new rocket resemble the previous generation encircling a new central core. This unique configuration brought the total weight to an astounding 280 tons. The fuel was also upgraded, switching from alcohol to kerosene. The sheer size of the new rocket made it visually imposing even when stationary. However, the larger size and the inclusion of 5 propulsion systems meant that the fueling and oxidizer loading processes were time-consuming and complex. On the launch day of the new rocket, thousands of rat folk gathered outside the 3-kilometer exclusion zone to witness the event. Excitement gave way to fatigue and hunger as the lengthy preparations dragged on. Finally, the launch was ready. Empress Kerrigan personally gave the launch order. Flames erupted from the rocket's base, accompanied by billowing smoke that quickly obscured the rocket. In moments, the rocket pierced through the smoke and soared skyward. The rat folk watched as the rocket, trailing a fiery plume, shrank into a distant speck before vanishing entirely. The crowd stared skyward for a while longer before erupting into deafening cheers. The 4 boosters propelled the massive rocket to an altitude of 1,500 kilometers, successfully breaching the atmosphere before detaching. The primary stage's thruster was remotely ignited, and the rocket's navigation system recalibrated its trajectory. With renewed propulsion, the rocket continued toward the moon. Having escaped the atmosphere, the rocket faced significantly less air resistance. With only 1 engine left, it traveled nearly 100,000 kilometers before losing power. Captured by planetary gravity, it became an orbiting satellite. The launch plunged the rat folk into a frenzy of celebration. Luo Wen, too, was thrilled. Although the rocket was still far from reaching the moon, breaking through the atmosphere was a critical milestone. The remaining challenges of expanding the fuel capacity and increasing thrust were far easier to tackle than the initial development of a rocket. Meanwhile, Luo Wen's experiments had also made progress. First, his optical stealth system was functional. Its principle relied on nanometer-scale crystalline structures in his skin, forming specialized pigment cells. By controlling the spacing between the crystalline structures, these cells reflected different wavelengths of light. Over the years, Luo Wen had gained full control over this ability. Since many forms of radiation were transmitted via light, Luo Wen's eyes, which could perceive a broader spectrum than human eyes, clearly detected wavelengths invisible to others. Through continuous experimentation and observation, Luo Wen identified several wavelengths harmful to his body and adjusted his crystalline structures to reflect them. As for the remaining types of radiation, Luo Wen had no immediate solution and could only endure them by thickening the keratin layers on his outer body. His experiments on cold resistance, however, were at a standstill. While he could survive extreme cold by stalling his biological functions, this method lacked practicality. Yet, breakthroughs often came unexpectedly. After the new rocket breached outer space, several more launch tests followed. Though they didn't achieve further breakthroughs in flight distance, they successfully sent satellites and observation devices into space. Data from these devices revealed that outer space was cold, oxygen-deprived, and filled with various types of radiation. Without solutions to these challenges, the rat folk couldn't venture beyond their planet. Luo Wen realized early on that with relevant theoretical knowledge, he could conduct more effective experiments. For instance, with the theory behind rocket fuel and oxidizer systems, Luo Wen only needed to address a few key issues to develop a biological rocket. This approach was far more efficient and reliable than blindly relying on innate talent. In terms of time, evolving abilities for lunar travel through pure imagination would take an unmeasurable amount of time. But with theoretical knowledge and targeted evolution to address critical issues, Luo Wen estimated it might take only a century. Had he possessed this knowledge earlier, there would have been no need to cultivate the rat folk civilization. However, a mature rat folk civilization now proved invaluable. Not only did they continuously convert more members into the swarm, but they also provided Luo Wen with theoretical insights, serving as highly effective tools. The discovery of space radiation spurred numerous research efforts, with many experimental results and papers published. One paper, in particular, inspired Luo Wen greatly. Chapter 155, Experiments Underway, 4. Compared to cosmic radiation, the radiation Luo Wen dealt with in the laboratory was child's play. According to calculations, unless he thickened his keratin layer to over 3 meters, he would be unable to withstand such radiation. A 3-meter-thick keratin shell would require his body size to reach at least 20 meters to support the armor, and the weight would likely exceed 100 tons. Given the rat folk's current level of technology, even another century might not suffice to send him to the moon. Thus, the idea of enduring radiation physically was no longer feasible. The paper Luo Wen read discussed the hypothesis of planetary magnetic fields shielding against cosmic radiation. The author speculated that planets naturally generated a massive protective field, deflecting or neutralizing harmful radiation from space, as evidenced by the ability of life to thrive on planetary surfaces. The paper concluded with a proposal to research this field and replicate it in a small-scale magnetic device, which could be installed on rockets or personal protective suits to counter space radiation. Through the swarm network, Luo Wen quickly tracked down the author, who turned out to be working in a private laboratory under Starlight Enterprises. Unbeknownst to this rat folk, they were suddenly entrusted with a critical mission, promoted to lead a new laboratory, granted unlimited funding and personnel, and tasked with a single goal: developing the magnetic device envisioned in the paper as quickly as possible. Luo Wen's genetic library contained numerous organisms with unique understandings of magnetic fields, but none offered a complete framework. Even his anti-gravity wings, beetle elytra, were merely a rudimentary application of magnetic fields. Thus, Luo Wen needed a comprehensive theory to integrate and enhance these capabilities. Developing a magnetic organ was far more feasible than enduring cosmic radiation directly. Time flew by, and in just a few years, the rat folk's aerospace industry made remarkable strides. Rockets underwent continuous propulsion system upgrades, bringing them closer to reaching the moon. 2 years ago, they even managed to send a 4-clawed beast into space. Unfortunately, their rockets still lacked re-entry systems. The creature contributed a wealth of data before becoming a permanent fixture in planetary orbit. Last year, a rat folk was sent into low Earth orbit and successfully returned. Although they suffered numerous ailments afterward, they survived. Luo Wen was intrigued but frustrated. After studying the equipment used by the astronaut, he found little of immediate value. For instance, the rat folk's protective suit had multiple layers, including a vacuum layer to mitigate extreme temperatures in space. However, Luo Wen had no idea how to grow a vacuum layer within his body. There was good news, though. The radiation protection technology used in the rat folk's spacesuits originated from a private laboratory under Starlight Enterprises. The researcher, a rat folk named Karen, did not disappoint. They successfully developed a compact magnetic field protection device, which was further refined with ample resources and support. Eventually, the technology was streamlined into a metallic fiber material. The outermost layer of the rat folk's spacesuits was composed of this material. By forming a closed loop, it generated an induced current that produced a counter-electromagnetic field to block radiation. Luo Wen couldn't coat his body with such material, but he could use the theory to evolve an organ or ability with similar functionality. After a period of research and experimentation, he was nearing success. First, Luo Wen utilized genes from an electric fish species, whose specialized muscle tissue formed a natural electric organ. These fish also had numerous energy storage cells functioning like miniature stacked batteries. When the nerve center acting as a discharge hub sent signals, the electric organ released electricity, connecting the energy storage cells in series to generate high voltage. This structure could power a small magnetic field generator. To construct the generator, Luo Wen turned to the genes of a metal snail species that lived at depths of 3,000 meters, near hydrothermal vents and undersea volcanoes. Luo Wen had discovered these snails during a deep-sea exploration. While they didn't taste particularly good, their genes were worth collecting. The snails had metallic scales on their footpads and metal shells with natural magnetic properties, giving them a futuristic appearance. Using this trait, Luo Wen incorporated metal particles into his shell, arranging them into a biological magnetic field generator. The electric organ provided energy, successfully creating a small magnetic field on his body's surface. Not only did this magnetic field effectively block radiation penetration, but it also provided an unexpected bonus. The magnetic field's containment effect significantly reduced heat dissipation, stabilizing Luo Wen's ambient temperature. This serendipitously solved the problem of extreme cold in space, a long-standing concern for Luo Wen. Though unsure of the exact mechanism behind this result, Luo Wen chalked it up to an evolutionary anomaly. There was, however, a drawback. The system required a substantial intake of minerals to function. To make it viable for the swarm, the queen ant's diet would need to include specific minerals. Alternatively, Luo Wen considered enhancing the fungal carpet by integrating the metal snail's genes. Since it could already break down rocks and minerals, this genetic addition might enable it to extract the required materials more effectively. With the challenges of oxygen deprivation, low temperatures, and cosmic radiation resolved, Luo Wen made significant progress toward spacefaring capabilities. The remaining hurdle was energy acquisition. Once solved, Luo Wen would evolve into a true space-dwelling organism, with the swarm following suit. Another year passed. The rat folk's rocket propulsion research hit a bottleneck. Returning to old methods, they increased the number of thrusters from 1+4 to 1+6, and then to 1+8, bringing their rockets ever closer to the moon. Over the same year, Luo Wen delved into numerous research papers and discovered a new application for the swarm network. He could extract and clone specific memories from the rat folk's collective intelligence. It felt like forcibly downloading a book into his mind, allowing him to sift through the useful parts. While this saved time compared to traditional reading, it came with downsides. The memory extraction captured an entire time frame, including potentially unsavory personal experiences. After a particularly embarrassing incident, Luo Wen expunged the cloned memory with great effort and resolved to use this method sparingly. Still, a year of study provided Luo Wen with ideas on how to harvest energy in space. Chapter 156, The Internal Ecosystem Chamber. With setbacks in rocket propulsion research, some of the rat folk proposed building a space station in planetary orbit as a means of collecting data and conducting further studies. This idea inspired a subset of researchers to pursue related projects. One article suggested creating a self-sustaining ecosystem chamber aboard the space station. Plants could absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen, while rat folk would breathe the oxygen and produce carbon dioxide, establishing a closed-loop system. Although implementing such a system would be far more complicated than the article implied, the concept gave Luo Wen a new direction for his experiments. Previously, Luo Wen had focused on directly harnessing cosmic radiation. He had made some progress. Certain thermal radiation could provide large amounts of heat energy, but he had yet to find a method to convert that heat into biological energy, leaving him stuck in a dead end. Now, he had a fresh idea. Luo Wen already had the ability to integrate plant cells into his body, even incorporating chloroplasts. The ecosystem chamber concept seemed feasible for internal adaptation. Driven by inspiration, he began working immediately. His body was already sealed into an airtight structure from prior experiments with survival in oxygen-deprived environments, making it a natural closed chamber. He added numerous chloroplasts to his skin cells but quickly ran into compatibility issues. His optical stealth system and magnetic field generation system were also located in the skin. Adding chloroplasts risked disrupting their functions. Unable to resolve this, Luo Wen relocated the chloroplasts to a lower part of his body. However, this introduced a new challenge: limited light exposure. He experimented with using the nanocrystals from the optical stealth system to reflect light to the chloroplast's new location. This required creating dedicated light pathways and adding additional nanocrystals inside his body to enhance reflection. Otherwise, the small contact area would result in inefficient energy conversion, a highly inconvenient solution. Luo Wen resigned himself to this approach until a few days later, when he came across another paper. It suggested that plants could grow under artificial lighting or bioluminescence. The revelation hit Luo Wen like a bolt of lightning. Though he knew little about bioluminescence, this solution seemed promising. While installing artificial lights inside his body was out of the question, bioluminescent organisms provided an ideal alternative. Many insects and deep-sea creatures naturally emitted light. Luo Wen began experimenting immediately. Bioluminescent organisms typically contained a special gene that produced light cells. These cells housed two chemicals that reacted under specific catalysts, releasing energy almost entirely as light with minimal heat, a highly efficient illumination method. Luo Wen relocated the chloroplasts to an internal cavity surrounded by light cells. He then modified his respiratory system to direct carbon dioxide into the cavity, where the chloroplasts absorbed it and released oxygen. The result? Luo Wen became a glowing organism, or perhaps, a biomecha with built-in lighting. This system was far more reliable than his earlier design, but still fell short of a perfect cycle, requiring periodic replenishment of water and other materials. Thanks to his tail-lard storage organ, however, this periodic replenishment could be measured in years. Thus, Luo Wen had addressed almost every challenge posed by space travel. All that remained was acquiring a suitable vessel. "Overlord, don't you think our latest masterpiece is stunning?" Morgan asked, his tone full of self-admiration. Luo Wen, observing the rocket remotely through Morgan's perspective, replied via the swarm network, "Stunning? I'm speechless. Your praise is most gratifying, Overlord." "That wasn't praise, you fool. Can't you tell I'm being sarcastic? Perhaps it's a limitation of consciousness communication, I cannot detect tone." Luo Wen briefly considered retraining the rat folk scientist before turning his attention back to the rocket. Admittedly, the design left him astonished. The rat folk had devised a novel approach, strapping 36 secondary thrusters onto a single rocket. As a self-proclaimed intellectual, Luo Wen couldn't help but criticize the design's absurdity. The drag in the atmosphere alone would be monumental, and directional control seemed nearly impossible. Regret bubbled within him. He had entrusted his body to this mission. Yes, this was the vessel that would carry Luo Wen to the moon. It represented the pinnacle of rat folk ingenuity, resembling nothing more than a giant stick bound with over 30 grenades. This was the rat folk's first serious attempt to land on the moon. Even Empress Kerrigan had arrived at the command center to personally oversee the launch ceremony. "Can this contraption really fly?" Luo Wen asked, skeptical. "Rest assured, Overlord," Morgan replied confidently. "We are highly experienced with strapped booster rockets. While the drag is indeed significant within the atmosphere, it becomes irrelevant once we breach it. Our calculations confirm that 36 secondary thrusters can definitely propel the rocket's core to the moon." "Fine. Your verbosity convinces me." Luo Wen felt a sliver of relief after Morgan's detailed explanation. Luo Wen's body, secured under the guise of a volunteer organism, had been placed in a transparent box filled with observation instruments and loaded onto the rocket. Accompanying him were other equipment and an all-terrain rover. Shortly afterward, Morgan confirmed via intercom, "Overlord, the special organism has been secured on the rocket." Luo Wen nodded, then remembered this was consciousness communication and replied, "Understood." The connection between Luo Wen's main body and the brood nest remained his closely guarded secret. Even the most loyal and network-integrated rat folk had no access to this information. It wasn't a matter of mistrust but of caution. Luo Wen had long believed he wasn't the universe's only exceptional being. Who knew what other peculiar abilities might exist? Better safe than sorry. Paranoia was the ultimate survival skill. Chapter 157, Ignition. Once everything was ready, Empress Kerrigan issued the command, and the rocket launch countdown began. 10 seconds later, amidst billowing smoke, the rocket resembling a cluster grenade spewed flames as it shot toward the sky. The rocket steadily gained altitude. Its bundled secondary boosters, grouped in sets of 4, detached from the main body once their fuel was depleted. Perhaps due to the rocket's overly unique design and significant air resistance, Luo Wen experienced violent vibrations while confined in the cargo bay at the rocket's nose. The ride was exceedingly uncomfortable. Were it not for his resilient body, he might have been smashed to pulp within the cramped confines. Fortunately, the rocket's speed was commendable. After 20 minutes, utilizing a total of 3 sets of 12 secondary boosters, it successfully exited the atmosphere. The rocket then employed another set of boosters to reach planetary orbit. The boosters shut down as the rocket was captured by the planet's gravity. This planet had 2 moons, both similar in size and mass. The yellow-white moon appeared larger than the red-white one due to its closer proximity. Luo Wen's target this time was the yellow moon. After several failed attempts, the rat folk had calculated a precise and feasible landing trajectory through meticulous computations. The rocket remained in orbit for more than 10 hours, circling half the planet. Then, the boosters reignited, propelling the rocket onto a lunar-bound trajectory. The next 2 days were uneventful. Luo Wen spent this time in idle stasis, sparing himself the misery of enduring the cramped space. Vitals of the test subject are normal, but signs of low activity suggest potential injuries from severe vibrations during atmospheric exit, a uniformed female rat folk reported to Morgan while monitoring the instruments. Empress Kerrigan had left shortly after the rocket exited the atmosphere. Now, Morgan, the director of the Imperial Space Research Institute, was overseeing operations. Morgan was well aware of the test subject's nature. It was undoubtedly one of the Swarm Overlord's specially engineered bodies. Morgan also knew about the Overlord's experiments in private laboratories, and this body was likely one of the results. This mission served to test its performance in space. 2 days later, through Morgan's perspective, Luo Wen learned that the rocket was approaching the yellow moon's orbit. In 3 hours, it would collide with the yellow moon. Yes, collide. With no atmosphere on the yellow moon to slow descent, the rocket's impact would be direct and unmitigated. This meant Luo Wen was in for a hardcore landing. As the rocket approached, tension mounted in the control center. The rat folk responsible for monitoring data didn't dare blink. The rocket, now with only 4 secondary boosters left, was running out of fuel. 30 minutes before impact, the last 4 boosters exhausted their fuel and began detachment procedures. The metal framework securing the boosters to the rocket was remotely unlocked. This 1+32 configuration was being used for the first time, and this was also the first time a rat folk spacecraft had traveled this far. Inevitably, a malfunction occurred. One of the secondary boosters failed to eject properly due to a malfunction in its release mechanism. As a result, it collided with the rocket's main body during separation, damaging the rocket's engine base. In the ground control center, piercing alarms blared. Observation devices showed damage to the rocket's engine on the right side, though the extent was unclear. Shortly thereafter, black smoke began billowing from the rocket's base. After limping along for several more minutes, the engine exploded, followed by the fuel tank. The rocket's nose, along with the cargo bay, was blasted away from the plume of smoke, veering off its planned trajectory. Panic erupted among the rat folk as they frantically recalculated the trajectory. Luo Wen recalled an old adage from a wise man: ugly weapons are usually unreliable. Thinking back to the rocket's cluster grenade-like design, he realized why he'd doubted its reliability from the beginning. Given its catastrophically ugly design, an accident seemed almost inevitable. Luo Wen was speechless. His body was now tumbling and spiraling through deep space, potentially destined to become a mere speck of decoration in the cosmic void. However, he could always self-destruct his body and regenerate back on the planet, so losing one insect form wasn't a major issue. The real problem was the lengthy delay for another lunar mission, and the bitterness of seeing his long-awaited hopes dashed. Time ticked away. After intense calculations, the rat folk gathered new information. "Overlord, are you still there?" Morgan asked. "What's the situation?" Luo Wen's voice echoed in his mind. "Overlord, the outlook is grim." Luo Wen had anticipated this outcome. It seemed another delay was inevitable. "However, there's still a chance to salvage the situation," Morgan added after a pause. Luo Wen was momentarily irritated, suspecting Morgan was deliberately being cryptic, though he had no proof. Perhaps he could just dig into Morgan's mind to find out. "The rocket's nose and cargo bay will be captured by the yellow moon's gravity in 10 minutes, entering its orbit," Morgan quickly continued, sensing Luo Wen's ominous thoughts. But before Luo Wen could relax, Morgan added, "However, although the rocket's propulsion system was destroyed, its initial speed was too high. With minimal resistance in space, it will exceed the escape velocity of the yellow moon after being captured, remaining in orbit for 34 minutes before being flung into deep space." Luo Wen became serious, understanding the gravity of Morgan's statement. "So, I need to control the insect form to detach from the rocket within this 34-minute window." "Yes, Overlord." "What are your suggestions?" "There are 2 options. First, after detaching from the rocket, the insect form's speed will be 3.5 km per second. You'll need to decelerate to and maintain a speed of 2 km per second to stay in orbit. Then, at the right moment, accelerate to 2.5 km per second to leave orbit and head for the yellow moon. And the second option. Chapter 158, Separation. The second option is to detach from the rocket and, instead of decelerating, accelerate inward toward the yellow moon. The rocket will be flung out of lunar orbit, while the insect body accelerates toward the moon's surface, Morgan explained, stroking his whiskers. Although the gesture seemed incongruous with his younger body, it had become a habit. What are the pros and cons of each plan? Luo Wen asked after some thought. The first option offers higher safety. Staying in lunar orbit provides ample time for observation and finding the right moment. The downside is the difficulty of accelerating the insect body by an additional 0.5 km per second during detachment. The second option's advantage is immediate action. You can proceed to the moon landing without delay. However, the opportunity is fleeting, and the descent carries significant risk due to high speed. What will you choose, Overlord? Luo Wen pondered. His primary body's Gatling system had been replaced with a jet propulsion system during anaerobic tests. He wasn't confident in its ability to increase speed by 0.5 km per second. Failure would mean being trapped in lunar orbit and forced to self-destruct, awaiting another chance. The second option appeared riskier, but its challenges were mainly in timing and deceleration during the landing. With his reaction speed and ultra-high-resolution vision, he was confident he could manage timely deceleration. After conveying his decision to Morgan, Morgan immediately mobilized personnel to recalculate trajectories. 10 minutes later. The rocket has been captured by the yellow moon's gravity and is entering lunar orbit, a researcher monitoring the screens reported. The rocket has entered lunar orbit and will leave it in 34 minutes. The rocket has been in orbit for 19 minutes. Calculations remain unchanged. It will leave orbit in 15 minutes. Let's begin, Morgan, Luo Wen's voice echoed in Morgan's mind. Luo Wen would need to focus entirely on controlling his insect body, leaving ground operations to Morgan. Morgan, through the swarm network, pulled trusted personnel into a private channel and began directing. Plans originally reserved for post-lunar landing had to be implemented ahead of schedule. Suddenly, alarms blared in the ground control center. Report. Monitoring in the rocket's cargo bay has failed. What's the cause? Morgan asked, maintaining a calm expression that betrayed no hint of the unfolding chaos. Likely the result of the earlier fuel tank explosion, which destabilized the cabin. The rocket remains under the moon's gravitational pull, accelerating as the cabin deforms, a researcher speculated. Before Morgan could respond, another observer shouted, "Report. The test subject's life support pod has lost contact. Vital signs are gone. Report. The cargo bay is compromised. The rocket's nose has separated from the bay, and internal gases are leaking." The control room descended into chaos, red lights flashing as bad news piled up. Meanwhile, Luo Wen, after the monitoring failure, easily opened the transparent container restraining him. Smashing a protective case on the cabin wall, he revealed a red button inside. Feigning a deep breath, Luo Wen pressed the button. With a loud bang, the rocket's nose cone was ejected. Since the cabin contained air, sound traveled, making the ejection noise audible. The connection between the nose cone and the cargo bay revealed a large circular hole. Through it, the pitch-black expanse of space was visible. Before Luo Wen could appreciate the view, the cabin's escaping air swept him and various debris out through the opening. As he tumbled, Luo Wen increased the refresh rate of his vision. To him, the surrounding debris, the rocket's nose cone, and the cargo bay seemed to drift away in slow motion. Now adrift in space without any external protection, he immediately felt the extreme conditions. The side of his body facing the sun soared above 300 degrees Celsius. Thankfully, he had anticipated this, incorporating nano-heat-resistant materials from a mantis shrimp's hammer into his carapace. Without them, the high temperature would have inflicted severe damage. The side facing away from the sun plunged to -200 degrees Celsius, creating a temperature gradient of several hundred degrees. Meanwhile, his body continued to spin uncontrollably, producing a uniquely unpleasant sensation. His internal power system activated, supplying energy to his magnetic field generator. Blue electrical arcs danced across his carapace as a small magnetic field enveloped his body. Simultaneously, small vents on his body released jets of gas, gradually reducing his spin until he stabilized. Once his body stopped spinning, the vents closed immediately. In the vacuum of space, where replenishing air was impossible, the expelled gas came from his reserves. His muscles vibrated, bioluminescent organs lit up, and chloroplasts began working. The reserves in his tail fat organ rapidly depleted. Though wasteful, this generated copious amounts of oxygen and carbon dioxide necessary for both directional changes and deceleration during descent. The rocket and debris, though initially near him, maintained the same velocity, drifting away slowly. 5 minutes later, Luo Wen glanced back at the ratfolk creation one last time. Silently bidding it farewell, he acknowledged that they might never cross paths again in the vastness of space. Farewell complete, Luo Wen turned around. With the aid of his vents, he adjusted his trajectory by about 30 degrees toward the yellow moon. His propulsion system lacked the power for a perpendicular descent, which would only slow him down. Instead, he altered his angle slightly, allowing his current velocity to carry him toward the moon. In the featureless void of space, movement felt imperceptible, though his velocity was immense. As soon as he adjusted his angle, the rocket and debris disappeared from view. His course set, all that remained was to wait. He needed to travel for more than 10 hours, orbiting the moon 1.5 times before impact. This plan, meticulously calculated by several of Morgan's trusted aides, was now in motion. Unfortunately, without his monitoring equipment, Luo Wen couldn't precisely track his speed or position. From the moment he left the rocket, everything depended on his instincts. Thankfully, with the swarm network, he didn't have to stay inside his body for the entire journey. Instead, he could collaborate with Morgan and the others to refine the next phase of their plan. Chapter 159, Landing. Time passed, and Luo Wen's consciousness returned to his primary body. According to calculations, he was still 2 hours away from impacting the yellow moon. However, given the numerous unexpected variables, these calculations were no longer reliable. From this moment onward, he could land at any time. He had to remain vigilant, as his current velocity was near 3.5 km per second. A single moment of carelessness could result in a catastrophic crash on the moon's surface. To avoid distractions, Luo Wen connected over 100 blades to the swarm network, sharing his body's perspective with them. He doubted any mishaps could occur with such robust support. The view in space was stunning, but over time it became monotonous, with unchanging scenery and utter silence. Thankfully, with the blades acting as high-level aids to monitor his surroundings, Luo Wen had the luxury of some light-hearted banter over the network to stave off boredom. He even took the opportunity to name the nearby planet Genesis Planet, as it was the birthplace of the swarm. Luo Wen reasoned that as an insect destined to conquer the stars and seas, having a compelling backstory was essential. Titles like Zhao Zilong of Chongshan or Zhang Yide of Yan inspired him. Now that Genesis Planet had a name, he could proudly declare in future encounters, "I am Genesis F2A." With some accomplishments under his belt, perhaps this name alone would strike fear into his enemies. Before his imagination could spiral further, the blades raised an alert. Luo Wen realized his trajectory was veering toward the moon. He quickly abandoned his banter with the rat folk and focused his full attention on the task at hand. His orbital position was about 120 km above the moon's surface, and at his current speed of 3.5 km per second, a direct descent would take just over half a minute. However, since he was approaching at an oblique angle, the time would be slightly longer. The lunar surface expanded rapidly in his vision. Luo Wen needed to time his deceleration perfectly. Decelerating too early could leave him stuck in orbit, too late, and he'd end up a splattered mess on the surface. At 20 km from the surface, Luo Wen's black insect body suddenly opened all forward-facing vents, expelling gas at full force. His body, moving at extreme speed, was violently decelerated. The opposing forces of momentum and thrust nearly crushed his frame. Fortunately, his carapace had been reinforced with flexible cartilage inspired by deep-sea creatures. While this made him less resistant to physical attacks, it significantly enhanced his structural resilience under pressure. Moreover, metallic ions within the carapace ensured his physical defenses were not entirely compromised. Though 20 km seemed far, at Luo Wen's speed it passed in less than 6 seconds. Even with the intense braking, his landing velocity was still near 1 km per second. A plume of lunar dust erupted from a vast crater on the moon's surface, forming a hazy ring before gradually settling. The scene resembled a silent film, devoid of any sound. "Overlord, what's your status?" Morgan inquired. Luo Wen hadn't shared his perspective with the rat folk. The sudden silence during their conversation hinted that Luo Wen was focused on his landing. Morgan mentally calculated the time. The landing, whether successful or disastrous, should have concluded by now. Yet Luo Wen's prolonged silence left him uncertain, eventually compelling him to ask. At that moment, Luo Wen was assessing his injuries. Despite using his back, his strongest and most impact-resistant area for the landing, the impact had still taken a toll. Cracks marred the back armor, the magnetic field structure sustained damage, and a small section lost its protective field. Fortunately, the crater he created wasn't deep, and his relatively compact body fit snugly within it. Using surrounding lunar soil for cover, he could shield himself from radiation, though the extreme cold seeped through. His segmented structures near the damage site closed in time, but the chill was still uncomfortable. Luo Wen flexed his appendages. Both claw arms and his 8 legs were intact, but many joints were damaged and required repair. Elsewhere, his condition wasn't critical, but the energy reserves in his tail lard storage organ had dropped by over 50%. Repairing his injuries would deplete them further, and in his current situation, replenishing energy on the moon wasn't an option. Rapid depletion was an ominous prospect. Fortunately, Luo Wen had contingency plans for such situations. Somewhat dicey, but I'm alive, Luo Wen quipped, sparing a moment to reassure Morgan before mobilizing his body. Turning to the crater he had created, Luo Wen began digging deeper. Excavation was second nature to him, and his movements were efficient and fluid. However, the moon's surface consisted of only a thin layer of soft regolith, underlain by solid rock. Luckily, his think tank had anticipated this. His claw arms had been upgraded with metallic particles, increasing their hardness significantly. They now excelled at both digging and breaking through rock. Despite the enhancements, breaking rock was far more challenging than digging through soil. After laboriously extending the crater by 2 to 3 meters, Luo Wen paused. After a brief moment of retching, his body expelled a small spore capsule, the seed for a fungal carpet. This enhanced version, designed for space environments, would determine Luo Wen's ability to thrive in the cosmos. He had meticulously prepared for this moment, choosing the genetic traits of a beast with 4 stomachs. This creature could rapidly consume large amounts of food and regurgitate it later in a safe location for gradual digestion. While Luo Wen found the process distasteful, he valued its storage capabilities. Of the 4 stomachs, only one produced gastric acid, the other 3 functioned as storage spaces. This feature made it easy to store and retrieve items, even if the process was a bit unappealing. For the dream of conquering the stars, Luo Wen was willing to accept such compromises. Placing the fungal carpet seed at the bottom of the crater, Luo Wen covered it with loose stones and dust. Though the conditions were far from ideal, no water or fertilizer, the seed had a built-in nutrient pack stored within its capsule. This starter resource would allow it to take root and grow. After ensuring the seed was buried, Luo Wen moved on to the next task at hand. Chapter 160, The Second Brood Nest. Out of responsibility for the swarm's future development and admittedly, a bit for his own safety, Luo Wen had long been researching ways to enable the brood queens to download his primary genetic code. Alternatively, he sought methods to produce additional bodies or brood nests. After exhaustive research and experimentation, he concluded that having the brood queens download his original genetic code via a cloud storage system was currently beyond his capabilities. However, he had gained insights into creating more bodies or brood nests. Through trial, error, and some creative leaps, Luo Wen discovered that forcibly severing a body or brood nest from the swarm network effectively granted him the authority to produce another part. Simply put, disconnecting them from the network and simulating their death allowed him to incubate replacements. While the concept seemed straightforward, implementation was extraordinarily challenging. He needed to focus all his energy on severing a body or brood nest from the network, a process requiring tens of hours of uninterrupted effort until the new entity was fully incubated. Luo Wen positioned his body over the spore capsule, using surrounding dust to seal the pit before beginning his cocooning process. Meanwhile, on Genesis planet, deep within a subterranean nest 3,000 meters below the surface, a brood nest began secreting viscous fluid from its surface. Its massive body rapidly shrank as the liquid hardened, encasing the brood nest in an amber-like shell. This was Luo Wen's first formal attempt at regenerating a brood nest. Previous efforts were purely theoretical, so he had no guarantee he could sustain his focus for the necessary tens of hours. To mitigate risks, he prepared multiple contingencies. The brood nest utilized a pseudo-death ability derived from specific insect species. These creatures could expel most of their bodily fluids to encase themselves in an amber-like shell that was incredibly resilient, capable of withstanding most external threats. Within the shell, the creature entered a pseudo-death state, with its life force nearly extinguished. Without external stimulation, it could essentially die. While this ability was typically disastrous, turning pseudo-death into actual death, it was ideal for Luo Wen's purpose. The brood nest's pseudo-death significantly eased the energy drain required to isolate it from the swarm network. Surges of energy coursed through the swarm network, forcibly severing the pseudo-dead brood nest's connection. Simultaneously, the energy reserves in Luo Wen's tail lard storage organ began to deplete rapidly. Since Luo Wen's consciousness had decoupled from his physical body, he remained fully alert while his body entered its cocoon state. He redirected all available energy to the incubation process, entirely deprioritizing the repair of his injuries. As time passed, Luo Wen concentrated on severing the brood nest's connection to the swarm network. Meanwhile, on the yellow moon, his cocooned body began developing a bulge at the rear, which grew steadily larger. During this period, the fungal carpet seed beneath his body also came to life. Supported by the external spore capsule, it rapidly sprouted roots that extended deep underground. Luo Wen felt a wave of relief upon observing the fungal carpet's progress. Given the limited payload of the rocket and his body's size constraints, he had brought only one seed. If it failed to take root, the entire lunar mission would have been for naught. The carpet's roots secreted a substance called lichen fluid, which efficiently dissolved the hard rock below. The yellow moon contained water resources, though they were unevenly distributed and existed primarily as solid ice due to the frigid temperatures. Luck favored Luo Wen. His crash had created a crater about a meter deep, and his subsequent digging extended it by another 2 to 3 meters. Within 5 days, the fungal carpet's roots had penetrated roughly 10 meters further, eventually discovering solid ice crystals. As the roots penetrated the rocky layers, they also absorbed various metals. The enhanced version of the fungal carpet incorporated Luo Wen's advanced space technology. With access to water, it transitioned from relying on the spore capsule to becoming self-sufficient. Equipped with modules for producing metallic particles, magnetic field generators, and self-illumination systems, the carpet accelerated its growth. A root from the fungal carpet extended into the cracked cocoon enveloping Luo Wen's body. Incubating a brood nest demanded immense energy. With his tail lard reserves nearly depleted, the carpet's timely intervention prevented Luo Wen from resorting to consuming his own flesh to sustain the process. Having overcome the initial challenges, the fungal carpet not only supported Luo Wen but also continued to expand its infrastructure. By the time the brood nest incubation was complete, the carpet's main body had spread throughout the pit, glowing with multicolored light that flickered and shifted. This illumination system, an enhancement designed by Luo Wen, replaced the monotonous yellow-green glow of its predecessors with a more diverse palette inspired by marine bioluminescent creatures. However, gazing at the vibrant, nightclub-like lights within the pit, Luo Wen couldn't help but think of certain earthly entertainment venues. He briefly considered reverting the lighting system to something less gaudy. Once the new brood nest completed incubation, it conducted a self-diagnostic before detaching from Luo Wen's body and interfacing with the fungal carpet to begin producing space-adapted swarm units. These units required specialized components for surviving in space, making them significantly more complex and costly to produce. For example, magnetic field generators necessitated metal resources, driving up their production cost to many times that of their terrestrial counterparts. Despite their expense, the emergence of these space-adapted units marked the swarm's expansion beyond its home world. The harsh conditions of outer space would no longer confine the swarm. To distinguish them, Luo Wen named the original brood nest on Genesis planet the Genesis brood nest, while the newly created one on the Yellow Moon was christened the Yellow Moon brood nest, reflecting their respective birthplaces. After the Yellow Moon brood nest came online, the Genesis brood nest initiated its reawakening sequence. The amber encasing it began to dissolve as pre-prepared nutrients flowed from the fungal carpet. The brood nest's desiccated body swelled like an inflating balloon, regaining its full form within an hour. Reawakened, the Genesis brood nest seamlessly integrated with the Yellow Moon brood nest. Luo Wen noted that the swarm network seemed to grow stronger as a result.